All right, well, welcome everybody. Well, thanks so much for coming. This is an introduction to A Course in Miracles, and this is a 6-week webinar. And I think you know pretty much the technical details that are involved. You're all logged in, and I can see your chat as text comments. So those come up right away. And although I can type in a text as a response, I'll usually just give you an answer through the webcam. So this is Happy New Year. It sounds like it's cold in much of the U.S. as it is here in Winfield, Illinois, but that's just the season. So, all right, well, good. So this is an introduction to A Course in Miracles, and it is an introduction. So to whatever extent you know anything about the Course, you're welcome. If you don't know anything whatsoever about A Course in Miracles, but you've heard about it over the years, you're also welcome. And I'm going to start presupposing no knowledge whatsoever of A Course in Miracles other than its name, which you must have heard if you're interested enough to take this course. And that's pretty much about it. A Course in Miracles is that is how it opens. This is A Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. And that might sound a bit, shall we say, demanding. But as you get along in finding out what that's really saying, in a way, it's actually quite consoling. So this is part of a universal course that in many ways takes different forms according to many esoteric traditions. This happens to be one version of it that was published in 1975 for the first time. Go on. A Course in Miracles is a channeled text. And as this discussion on the screen says, channeling is a means of communicating with any consciousness that is not in human form by allowing that consciousness to express itself through a living human individual. What does that mean? Well, a lot of times it means that a given individual, the channel, who's a living human person, hears this voice, usually internally, that seems to be quite different from his or her own conscious self or even unconscious self. It seems to be a communication from another entity, not on this material plane, who has something to say, and generally finds it easier to communicate by this kind of telepathic communication with one person than trying to converse with a lot of people for whom, for, shall we say, technical reasons, it might prove very difficult. And channeling is a fairly new term, but the phenomenon is a universal one and a very ancient one. And here are some channeled texts. Well, A Course in Miracles, because obviously I wouldn't be talking about this if the Course weren't a channeled text. Some of you may be familiar with the Seth material channeled by Jane Roberts. Another book that was quite popular in New Age circles, and you still see it, is the Urantia book, which is quite different from any of these and not a work I'm particularly familiar with. An older one is a Waspe, which started to be channeled in around 1880. It's a rather long history, prehistory of the world, told in rather supernatural terms. It's almost completely forgotten now, but in its day, it had a following, and it's certainly a work of curiosity, if nothing else. Probably the most famous channeled work that anybody could think of is the Quran, a holy book of over 1 billion Muslims. And the Quran was dictated, or as we would say, channeled, by the angel Jibril, better known to us as Gabriel, to the Prophet Muhammad, over the course of some 20-odd years, last 20-odd years of his life. And these are verses in rhyme, and they were dictated at different times and put together also by, shall we say, divine or supernatural direction, and that is what the Quran is today. Since this is not a course in the Quran, I'm not going to go any further, but in many respects it is a channeled course, not unlike the course in miracles itself. Now, channeling can be a lot of different things. Sometimes there's a trance channel, and the Jane Roberts Seth material is like that. That is to say, the person who's doing the channeling, Jane Roberts, is in a trance. She is not aware of what she's saying while she's speaking. She spoke X, Y, and Z, and her husband, who was present, would just write everything down. And that's what you had if you get the Seth Speaks or any of the other Seth books. I think there are about 5. Now, other channel texts are not dictated in this kind of trance medium way. And A Course in Miracles is among the latter. That is to say, the woman who it was channeled or transmitted was quite conscious when she made notes. In fact, she herself wrote everything down in shorthand. Only later was it transcribed and typed. And she could start or stop whenever she wanted. If she delayed a little bit too long, I get the impression there was a bit of discomfort, and she would feel the need to pick it up again soon. Who is this channel text woman? Her. It's a woman named Helen Schucman, who was a professor of medical psychology at Columbia University. So she was from a very highly intellectual, highly academic, highly medical background. And she had no really particular interest in religion. She was raised a Jew, but probably not a very observant one. And she had a partner in the same department who is this man, Bill Thetford. And maybe I'll even just read just a snippet or two of what they had to say about it. This is Helen. Psychologist, educator, conservative in theory, and atheistic in belief, I was working in a prestigious and highly academic setting. And then something happened that triggered a chain of events I never could have predicted. The head of my department, who was Bill Thetford, the guy the green arrow is pointing at, unexpectedly announced that he was tired and angry of the angry and aggressive feelings our attitudes reflected, and concluded that there must be another way. As if on cue, I agreed to help him find it. Apparently this course is the other way. Now this took place starting in 1965, so it was in Columbia University, so it was in New York City. And without going into further details about the process, it took several years to transcribe the complete works. The other two people here. This is Kenneth Wapnick, who was an early associate of theirs, who was fairly instrumental in editing it from a kind of almost, grammatical copy editing point of view. He was very heavily involved in the course and taught the course continuously until his death, which I think was a couple of years ago. This lady, Judy Scutch-Whitson, is basically became the publisher of A Course in Miracles through an organization called, a nonprofit organization called the Foundation for Inner Peace. She is still alive and well and living in California. She sent me a very kind email a couple of days ago wishing me well for this webinar. She's the only one who's, shall we say, still around. Helen died in 1981, and she never associated herself with the Course very much. She was very, very reluctant to do so. Most of her friends didn't know that she had anything to do with this. It was all kind of a bit on the secret side. In fact, at her memorial service, I'm told, she specifically requested that nobody mention the Course because she said, all my friends are going to be there. So she was almost a little bit embarrassed about it. Bill Thetford survived her by about 7 years. He ended up moving to California. I saw him a couple of times. I went to a Course in Miracles group in Tiburon, California, Marin County, where he was present. This would have been in the early 80s. And he was a very nice, very unassuming man. He didn't even lead the group. Someone else led the group and certainly spoke, but usually when asked. So these people were not really in it for the money or for the ego. I don't think they made any money out of it at any point. The Foundation for Inner Peace is a nonprofit organization, which, by the way, I'm not connected. I have no direct connection with any organizations that work with or teach the Course. I mean, I know many of them, and I know many of the people in them, and I have no problems with any of them, but I myself am not affiliated with any of them. So this is who they are. And you'll see here it says at the end of the scribal process of ACIM, which is a common acronym for A Course in Miracles. And this was pretty much when it was transcribed and edited and produced in its first printed form. Let me, all right, well, I'll proceed as planned. Who channeled this? What supposedly channeled this? Well, they generally refer to this being as the voice. But this voice throughout the Course, mostly, particularly in the earlier parts of it, tends to speak in the first person as I, and this I leaves you with the impression that it is none other than Jesus Christ himself. Now, notice, here are a couple of quotes from Jesus in A Course in Miracles, or the voice who claims to be Jesus, that paints a very different theological picture than that of conventional Christianity. In the first place, you'll see, if you read the quote at the top, "There is nothing about me that you cannot attain," means that there is no qualitative difference between Jesus and everybody else, including you and me. That is to say, he is not God incarnate in any sort of way that you aren't, or I'm not. Very later on in the teacher's manual, it says, "Is he the Christ? Oh, yes, along with you." So, as explained in the second quote, "No man cometh to the Father but by me," does not mean that I am in any way separate or different from you except in time, and time does not really exist. So, although, and I'll explain a bit more about this, although probably not tonight, because we've already got plenty going on. But the point is this voice is, shall we say, identifies itself with Jesus, or permits one to expect that it is Jesus. Is it? Well, I have no way of knowing, and I'm fairly open on this point. It does say, of course, that there are many areas in which what the Course says appears to conflict with what Jesus says in the Bible, but Jesus also says in the Course that the apostles distorted his message. And this is a verdict that's been pronounced by pretty much every mainstream scholar, who say that all of them say that the things in the Gospels, well, some of them Jesus may have said, probably did say, some of them he probably didn't, some of them he may almost definitely not have said. Which is which? Well, it kind of depends on what scholar you talk to. But it is a pretty mainstream opinion that the New Testament as we have it varies to some degree from Jesus's message. So the fact that the Course may differ from it is not in itself a refutation. My own point of view is quite simply, well, there's no real way of proving it one way or another because you can't check it against the Bible for the reasons I've just given you. So I myself prefer to just take an open-minded, agnostic approach. It may have been channeled by Jesus, it may not have been. In any case, as with all sacred material, you're left with one final criterion, which is, does this have any authenticity? Does this have any power? Does this have any truth? From your point of view, for you. And you're the only authority in the end that can decide that. And that's certainly true of the Course in Miracles, but it's true of everything else. Religious authorities don't necessarily like you to be reminded of this truth because often their job involves, or they think it involves, you're believing what they say and taking it at face value. That's a long story which devolves into the history of religion of man, which this is not a course about. So we'll just say that. In terms of whether it was by Jesus or not, you don't have to jump to any quick conclusions either tonight or after 35 years. In fact, I've studied the Course myself for 35 years, so I think you can leave that question pretty flexible for a long time. Not everybody agrees. Some people will just say Jesus says in the Course, but I don't really like going around Jesus saying Jesus says this, Jesus says that in any context, and I'm not going to start here. Question of my personal taste. All right, so what do we have here? A Course in Miracles is the title. This is A Course in Miracles. You've already seen why. And it's in 3 parts. A text, a workbook, and a manual for teachers. It's useful to know this. As I say, I'm not assuming any prior knowledge on your part, and it's helpful to make this clear at the beginning. Well, what do these look like? Well, let me show you the first printed edition, which I bought for the princely sum of $12 in a bookstore in New York's teeming and colorful East Village. Okay, I'm holding it up here. Right. This is the text. It doesn't really look like this anymore, but this is, A Course in Miracles tends to have blue covers, but there's a thing that says text. That's 1 volume. And volume 2 is workbook for students. And volume 3 is a much shorter manual for teachers. The text is the thickest part, shall we say. The workbook next, the manual third. Together they amount to about 1,200 pages, and they're fairly good-sized pages. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is if you need to buy a copy or want to buy a copy, the old editions, the ones that came out, say, the first 15 years of the Course's history, and it was published first in 1975, which is when that edition was published, are in those 3 volumes. Most volumes today are a combined 1-volume edition, and that is this. This is what it will look like. And although it's not terribly clear, it does say under Course in Miracles, it says combined volume, which contains all these things and a couple of other supplements as well, which I'm not going to get into now. So if you're going to buy one, you can certainly buy the 3 volumes, but make sure you're buying all 3 volumes. You could well go home with a thing that only says the text, but it will say only the text. I mean, it's not misleading, but sometimes those early volumes are sold separately, and most people these days find it convenient to have the combined volume that I have. The particular one that I just showed you is a hardcover, which costs $35. There are many others that are used otherwise that cost less. There are ebook versions, audio versions, all sorts of versions, for various purposes and whatnot. You can certainly research these on the internet. There are other versions of it out there. This is the version this is the original version. This is the only one that Helen Schucman herself had any hand in. Remember, she died in 1981. Now, there are a couple of other earlier drafts of it circulating. And this is a matter I'm not going to get into because it gets quite technical. I personally recommend that you buy editions published by the Foundation for Inner Peace, which were its initial publishers and are still going strong. Is there anything wrong with the other editions? Not really. They're harder to work with. And I'm not going to explain the technicalities of these differences because it would be far beyond our purposes here. If you really want to know, particularly if you already have some background, you can look at this thing, this monograph that I wrote, which is called A Comparison of Miracles. And it's basically a very short analysis of the difference between these different editions. It was published by a friend of mine who's a Course in Miracles writer and publisher named Patrick Miller, D. Patrick Miller, who has an enterprise called Fearless Books. That should be readily available if you want to read it. If you happen to get one of these later versions, there's no harm in it. The earlier drafts had a lot of personal material in it that would be rather distracting because initially it was actually talking to Helen and Bill about their particular issues. And most of the editions have this stuff taken out. There's nothing particularly gross or shocking or evil in it, but it is highly personal, and it would be that much harder to get into the course cold if you are starting with those. There are various people who are kind of seasoned students of the course who like some of these other versions, but it's almost for the sake of variety. They don't differ doctrinally anyway, and except for the first 11 chapters of the text, they're identical or functionally so. So just in case you've heard about any of these controversies, I could go into them. It had something to do with the copyright and whatnot, and I could discuss all of this, but it's not for an introductory course. And I would say use the Foundation for Inner Peace version. I mean, you're not going to, as I say, you're not going to go hideously wrong or fall into serious error by using any of the others. It's merely a question of what's most practical and useful. So, now, what does the course teach? Here is its own summary of its teaching. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. You may or may not find this reassuring at first glance, because of course, coming to it off the street, you may find that you're not entirely sure what it means by what is real and what isn't real. And you can certainly see that the Course's view of what's real and what's unreal is a little different from the conventional view, which we'll get into. But the peace of God is an important message, and certainly just about everything in the Course is meant to, or everything in the Course is meant to lead you toward greater peace of mind rather than less. The Course says that there are only two emotions fundamentally, love and fear. That's even fewer than the basic emotions that modern psychology, I think they have about 5 that have come up. But the Course says that it all amounts to love and fear, and you're either expressing one or the other at any given moment. And if the extent that you're expressing love, you probably feel some sense of peace and happiness. The extent that you're expressing or feeling fear, probably feel miserable to one degree or another. Obviously, there are degrees. Well, how did this all come about? This is an image of Peter Paul Rubens, the 17th century Flemish master, of the fall of man. Now, many people are aware of the quite accurate fact that this did not happen in literal time. That is to say, God did not get mad at the human race because somebody ate a piece of fruit in Armenia 6,000 years ago. I doubt that that's news to many of you, but even if it is, that's just not the way it happened, in all likelihood. That does not mean that this idea of the fall is wrong. It's merely that all of these images in the book of Genesis are discussing things somewhat symbolically. Once you understand that, the fact that these things are actually quite true drives itself home. All right, here is the fruit. Here is the tree. You all remember, I suppose, that the tree that they were not supposed to eat of was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, what kind of fruit was it? Well, the fruit was the knowledge of good and evil. Put it another way. A man and a woman come to God one day and say, hey, and they're in a beautiful spot. They're in paradise. Everything is great. Hey, Lord, we've heard about this thing called good and evil. We kind of like to find out what it is. And God says, frankly, that's not a good idea. I do not suggest you do this. And they said, oh, come on, we want to. And then God said, all right, well, you get your wish, but you're going to have to go to a realm where you have to work hard for a living and where it hurts to have babies. Sorrow thou shalt give forth. I've done nothing now than tell you the story of Genesis in a slightly more, shall we say, casual and up-to-date form. So, you want to know what good and evil is? Well, you're here. I don't know anything about most of you, but I certainly know that all of you have experienced some good and evil in your lives. I will say that categorically about the other 7 billion people running around this planet. Everyone experiences good and evil. Well, why is this? Could God have wanted this? Well, no, actually, apparently not, because it was the idea of this primordial man and woman who are, in a sense, kind of a cosmic man and woman. They wanted to know what good and evil was. So, okay, we got our wish, collectively speaking. So here we are. Most of us find it a bit awkward sometimes. And then, of course, there's this constant rule, well, why does evil exist? Well, evil exists in a way because this is what we chose. And the Course's term for this is the separation. It does use the term fall, but it also uses the term separation. And the separation is the detour into fear. Now, you'll notice that I said earlier that the Course says there are only two emotions, love and fear. Well, it wasn't God's idea for anybody to experience fear. It's according to the teachings of the Course and maybe even according to the book of Genesis. But for some reason, one wished to know about this. And here's a curious line in the Course. The Bible says that a deep sleep fell upon Adam. And nowhere is there reference to his waking up. That is to say, and this is a tradition, an idea that's recognized and echoed in many ways in different spiritual traditions, that what we live in is a kind of sleep. The spiritual teacher Gurdjieff said that man lives his life in sleep he is born, and in sleep he dies. Now, what Gurdjieff meant by this and what the Course means by it are two different things, and I won't go into Gurdjieff because this is not a course about Gurdjieff. But this is a kind of stupor. And the separation involves the belief that we can exist apart from God and the desire to do so. Because you had to want this, right? This wasn't given because until you wanted. They ate the fruit, figuratively speaking. Now, the human, well, we are all collectively and individually God's son. And of course, generally speaks of us all as God's son and sons even though that's a bit gender specific, and that's the way it came out. Some women have more trouble than this with others, so I can understand, but it is the language of the Course, and it has its own eloquence, and also its relevance to the Christian theology, which also talks a great deal about Son and Father. Anyway, the Son, which is us, was given all the powers of the Father, including infinite creativity and power. So if you want to make a world in which you appear to be cut off from God, you can. And the whole point of the Course, and one of the many central points of the Course, is that, in fact, we have. But there's only so far we can go. This really wasn't God's will, so this separation, this fall, is not God's will. The sense of being separate from God is not God's will, so therefore it is not real. That's why nothing unreal exists. You can't change this. You can't change the infinite creativity and power of the mind, nor can you change the fact that you always remain one with God. But you can make it sure feel as if it is. And you can see the Course as an attempt to correct this fundamental error. And this error has to be corrected. Everybody has to come to this realization. It may well, and looks like it could take millions and billions of years. But nonetheless, because this isn't real, eventually everybody's going to find out the truth. And the Course is just a way of hastening that process. And the reason to hasten the process, that even though it's indefinite, is may well have to do with the fact that you waste a lot less time making yourself miserable in this life and, shall we say, others. So here we are, the world. This is the unreal. This is it. This is the world we see. We have made this world collectively. Some of our little hallucinations are individual, our little fears, our petty grievances, our petty thises and that's. Some of them are a more collective form of fear. Do they feel real? Yes. But on an ultimate level, because they're not God's will, they're not ultimately real. And this two levels, one, what we see, and the other, the real, that requires true vision to see, are different. It's not useful to confuse these two. Because, yeah, all this stuff that we see, the thing that everybody's upset about, things that everybody's upset about, do feel real. But then, of course, when you're suffering in a dream, that feels real too. And the analogy of this world to a dream is reiterated over and over again in the Course. And this basically is what I just said. The world of the body, the world of good and evil, the result of separation. Here's a familiar quote from a completely different tradition. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And already you can see two things. One is that if what I've said up to this point has any truth to it, somebody must have figured this out before 1975. Very likely expressed it in other words, but words start to seem rather similar, because all of these terms appear in the Course in ways that are not really all that different from that of Upanishads written 500 BC, 300 BC. I don't think the actual date is very specifically known. So this course is a universal course. It's found in the Upanishads, it's found in the Kabbalah, it's found in Buddhism in its way, in esoteric Christianity. This happens to be one version of it. And we go back to this. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So what is the way out? Read it for yourself. Excuse me. I can escape from the world I see by giving up attack thoughts. Now that is a lesson from the workbook. The workbook, to go back to that for a minute, is so called because it consists of 365 lessons to be practiced over the course of a year. And these are meant to apply the ideas of the course. The text, let's go back to that for a second just so you see. The text contains the theory. It's actually the most difficult part of the course. The workbook contains these 365 lessons, one of which I've just given you. And a manual for teachers is a short, very readable, and actually kind of engaging digest of these ideas. But to work with a course specifically, if you are going to try to do something seriously with it and try to carry out its teachings in its own terms, it does involve doing the workbook. The lessons are short, simple. They require, a few minutes a day. Ideally to be carried out once a day, one lesson a day for over the space of a year. I will talk a little bit more about working with the workbook probably next time. This course that is to say this introductory webinar course is not going to apply the workbook in that way because for one thing, we don't have 365 days to do it in. This is a 6-week course. But I will talk a little bit more specifically about working with it in practice and what are the best ways to start getting into it. Many people have a difficulty like, well, how do I get into it? And my own view, quite frankly, is the text is not the ideal place to start. I know when I first bought it and read it or started reading it, I found it rather opaque. But doing the workbook lessons was much easier and much more at least comprehensible on a from a beginning basis. But let's go back to this. I can escape from the world I see by giving up attack thoughts. If you have a copy of the course, that is to say, the edition I'm talking about, it's on page 34 of the workbook. If you don't have a copy of the course, I would say write this down because I would like you to spend a little time thinking about this over the course of the next week. That will be the assignment. A couple of people have asked me about what kind of assignments are going to be prescribed, and what they're going to be is not necessarily very time-consuming, involving a lot of writing, reading. Will you be tested on the material given? Yes, although probably not by me, almost certainly not by me. So your assignment is just to think about this idea. I am not insisting that you agree with it. I'm not insisting you do anything with it, but think about it. And in order to do that, one thing you will need to do is at least look in your mind and identify what might be considered attack thoughts. What is an attack thought? Well, Anything that makes you unhappy, anything that makes you miserable, frightened, fearful, angry, are very, very likely candidates for attack thoughts. Attack goes both ways. This is actually a very important point, which the course goes into, because let's put it this way. You can't attack without attacking within. The anger you feel, according to the course, is as much, more, almost completely against your projected image of somebody rather than that person himself or herself. Again, this is rather contrary to the ordinary conventional thinking, but if you go around, you realize, even if you're very angry with someone, you know, I've had this happen to myself any number of times. Like, I'm really angry with X person, and then, I've got all these thoughts about X person kind of going through my head, and then the X person shows up, and it's like, he or she almost has nothing to do with what was going on in my head. These are all just ideas for reflection. As I say, you don't have to agree with these ideas, this particular idea. You don't have to agree with anything, of course. With any of these things, it's a good idea not to, shall we say, snap the trap of acceptance and rejection too quickly. This is true, certainly with the course, certainly with many things in life. One axiom that I was taught very early on, doesn't appear in the course, but I was taught it early on, was neither accept nor reject. And that's a very important lesson to learn, because it gives you the freedom of contemplating an idea like this without having to go back and forth through your mind. Do I believe this? Yes, I do. No, I don't believe it. Yes, I do. Well, maybe you just kind of sit with it for a while. The world you see sometimes may appear to be a frightening place. I can tell you for a fact that there are many sources, many places that are telling you it's a very frightening place. And the only way out of it is to free yourself from these attack thoughts. This actually goes in a way more metaphysically deeply than we're going to be able to get into now. But I suggest all these things as just things to contemplate for the rest of the week. So, attack thoughts. What are they? Is this an attack thought? Well, how does it make me feel? Will I feel better with it or without it? Those are kind of questions you should ask. It's more important to answer the question sincerely and honestly than it is to come up with what you think is the right answer. It's always better to be honest with yourself, even if what you don't see is not what you like. You don't like what you see terribly well. It's usually the case with most of us. So I am going to stop here in terms of my own particular spiel. But now I am going to open it up for questions and discussion for the rest of the approximately 15 minutes that we now have. So if you have some questions, thoughts, comments, type them in while I wipe my nose. Waiting for some things to come up here. Is there any, everyone can see these chat things, right? I assume. Is there any information about why the course came out in Christian language? Yeah, because Christianity is the religion of our civilization. It is what people think of in terms of religion. Can you be an atheist or an agnostic today? Yes. But in the West, it will be the Christian God you don't believe in. I avoid saying the Judeo-Christian God because I don't really want to bring Judaism into it. I'm not a Jew, and I'm not really, I don't feel it's my place to speak about or for or regarding Judaism, particularly in this context. This is Christian language. There's also a desire to, shall we say, correct certain misimpressions about what might have originally been meant by this language. So if it were put in completely different language, it might not do that. All right, let's see here. Well, we've got a few. Can we get a printed outline? I've never really seen a short printed outline of the course. There are various introductions to it. I suppose I may as well mention this item, which is not really an introduction to it, but it is about forgiveness, which, by the way, not to give away any of the spoilers next time, but forgiveness is a very important matter in the course. So you might take a look at that. That book happens to be by me. It's just a very short, simple, concise guide. It's called A Guide to Radical and Complete Forgiveness is the subtitle. But there's a lot of material on the course on the internet. If you really want something kind of a more concise explanation of it, you can find it. Oh, by the way, I suppose I should add, in this combined volume, there is a brief 3 or 4 page discussion in the introduction that says what it says, which is probably the closest to a printed outline, or at least a printed summary that you're going to get. What do you do after completing 365 lessons? Start over? Well, it depends on who you talk to. I do know people who do the workbook over and over and over and over again. I have known people like that. There are people who start on January 1, so I guess they're on lesson 4 today or whatever, and just go and do exactly that. I personally don't recommend that. I do recommend, that the course's own instructions be taken seriously and at face value. But it goes to say lots of people don't do this. The idea is this: these 365 lessons are meant to kind of guide you internally to someplace where you can have access to your own guidance, which the course calls the Holy Spirit. After you finish this course, the idea is that you have enough kind of connection with this inner source that you don't need to do specific lessons, although you can apply the ideas as needed, which is what I do myself. I went through the workbook myself twice in the 1980s, I guess about, 5 or 6 years apart. And since then, I haven't felt the need to do that. But I do often find it useful to kind of browse through the course and find ideas that are particularly relevant, sometimes at random, sometimes specifically looking for something. So no, you don't have to start over again. I myself would also say, I would personally try to keep to the 365-year day thing. You shouldn't do one lesson more than once. No, I'm sorry, you shouldn't do more than one lesson a day. Many people have and said you can, spend more than a day on a lesson. You can. I don't encourage this myself from my own experience, for the simple reason that you can get very, very easily into this. Oh yeah, I didn't really do it that well this time, so I guess I better spend another day on it. So, well, I didn't really just spend that day on it so well either. So, and the thing sort of peters out. There's some advantage to kind of keeping a certain discipline and a different structure. Obviously, people react wildly differently to difference and structures of that kind. Please say more about attack thoughts. Well, let's take a really obvious one. The American person's most common and most frequently voiced frustration: somebody who cuts you off in traffic. Well, what comes up at that point? Often a kind of feeling of hatred, anger, fury, um, extreme cases, road rage. Now, you can take this very far, and unfortunately some people do, but for most people, um, you're just kind of cursing in your own car. The other car is driving around. A lot of times, the person doesn't even know he's cut you off. I've done it myself accidentally any number of times. So the kind of thought that you have, that kind of impulse of anger, hostility, would be an attack thought. That's a very obvious thing. And I would say specifically, see how you, what kind of effect does it have on you? How did you feel before? How do you feel during? How did you feel after? These little day-to-day things are easiest to work with, and they're often easiest to see. There are obviously much more deep-seated stances and attitudes that we go through life with that are a bit harder to take on. Is it copied, or is it a copy of the presentation material from this evening? Well, I don't know. Is it possible to, well, I don't know. I mean, I have this. One thing I can say is that in case you hadn't been told this already, you can watch this again. That is to say, you will be sent a link tomorrow morning that has all this again on it, so you'll be able to watch it as much as you like. Is it for sale on Amazon? My book on forgiveness. Yeah, this is available from all the usual vendors, from fine booksellers everywhere, including the ones online. It also comes in an ebook version, and if your tastes incline in that direction, an audio version that I recorded myself with my own two lungs. So those are all out there. The audio ebook versions are downloadable in a minute from the usual sources. But this is my name, Richard Smoley, right? As you've already seen. I have written a number of other books. All of them are easily available online. I'm not going to go into them tonight because it's we've got enough to say. But I also have my own website. I also have a Wikipedia article. I also have a blog. And if you just like Richard Smoley blog, Richard Smoley website, you can come to those very easily. But yeah, all that stuff is easily available. How do you wish us to submit your homework? Good question. Next time around, that is to say our next meeting at 8 p.m. Central Time, I'd like you to just type in some reflections and thoughts on your experience, what you learned, what problems you may have had, and we can just discuss them then. Cool. My favorite media these days. Well, that's good to hear. So yeah, it's, as I say, you can read any part of the course you want. You can start with a workbook. I'm not going to structure it according to the course's own thing because this is just a 6-week period, and besides, it would be a little bit much to plunge anybody into. You're making a commitment to at least learn a little bit about it and hear about some details on it. And I haven't necessarily decided to plunge in. It's a personal commitment and one you can make yourself, should you wish. I mean, as far as doing the course, starting the workbook, as far as I'm concerned, you can start tomorrow. If you do, I'll certainly have, you can bring up any questions or answers that may come up. If you prefer not to do it that way, you can just simply, as I work with the week's idea, I'll try to give some little practice like this at the end of each thing, so you can take some of these ideas and work with them and see if they make sense to you. Oh, by the way, you're identifying attack thoughts. You found an attack thought. What would it mean to give it up? I mean, I'm not talking about dictionary definitions here. It's like, what does it feel? What would it feel like internally? What does it feel like internally for you to give up an attack thought should you choose to do so? Is it hard? Is it easy? It may not matter. Matter of fact, it may not be quite as hard as you may think it is. But as a friend of mine said, she had a dog she needed to teach stop barking. And she said, well, the first thing you have to do to teach a dog to stop barking is to teach it that it's barking. So in this case, at the very least, if you're going to learn how to give up attack thoughts, or at least contemplate the possibility, better first notice that you have attack thoughts, and what they're like and how they make you feel. Anyone else? Any other question coming? I find some thoughts keep coming back after I thought I had given it up. Yes, that's true. That's true. The mind has this tendency to repeat things. The mind has a certain, shall we say, automatic, mechanical part of itself that repeats everything from your nastiest feelings about your enemies to some song you heard on the radio that you found extraordinarily irritating this morning. The mind does that. But then, I mean, all of it, in a sense, is grist for the mill in that, well, this keeps coming up. What's it like to have it come up? What would it be like to, what would stop it from coming up, or at any rate stop it from coming up so frequently and so insistently? Again, I would suggest these as areas of investigation. You identify an attack thought, consider the possibility of giving up, and see how it works. Yeah, I mean, could there be techniques given and, meditations and whatnot? Yeah, and in fact, my book, The Deal, does have a very comprehensive exercise about forgiveness on a large scale because, oh, by the way, complete and radical forgiveness, well, there are certain things it's more easily done on an all or nothing basis. And you can look at forgiveness that way. And that's what that particular book is about. But thoughts will come back, come and go. The old, I don't know, whether it was Sufi or Zen master. These sorts of things are always attributed to Sufi masters or Zen masters. But, these thoughts, can sometimes be likened to, unwanted guests that come into your house, and you just sort of note that they're there, acknowledge them, and let them go. Some of meditative practice of all kinds is intended to do this. And those of you who meditate or have meditated may want to see how your practice enlivens this. But if you've never meditated at all or have no intention of doing so, you can still learn a lot just from the act of observation. Another thought that might be useful is, as anyone know who's lived in a crummy city apartment, the minute you turn on, the roaches scatter. That is to say, in the context of the mind, certain things can't happen in the dark. Certain negative things almost just stop just because you turned on the light. Not all of them, because all you would have to do is, shall we say, turn on the light. But sometimes that happens. As they say in quantum physics, whatever it means, and I'm quite sure I don't know what they mean, the act of observation changes the observed. Well, that's certainly true of the mind. Whether it's true of photons or whatnot, they say it is, and I suppose I'm willing to believe them. But it is true of the mind. So the next thing is just to investigate a little bit. So, my friends, in spirit of courtesy, I don't want to keep you here any longer than you've booked on for, because I know you have lives and things to go on to. But it's been a pleasure being with you, and I really appreciate your presence and your questions. So stay tuned for the next episode, same time, same station next week. Thank you.